Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to talk a bit about Liquid, which is the kind of pseudo code language that powers Bento's email builder, and like most email service providers is email builders, and also Bento's magic splits and things like that. So basically any situation where you want to either inject some subscriber data into an email or do some like conditionals. So if this, then that kind of things in emails, or using magic splits in your flows to transform data, or even events in flows, passing data to other events. All of these things use Liquid. Liquid's a bit scary at first, especially if you're not like a developer, but fortunately for you, it's easier than ever to produce good Liquid code thanks to AI. So with this lesson, I think I'm not going to walk you through every single thing that I have typed, since reading it on the page is a little bit easier, but I'll kind of point you to the shape of things and make sure that you're set up on the right foot to take advantage of this. So this section here, where to get help producing your Liquid code, this to me is the most important part of the video aspect of this lesson. First up, the Liquid template guide is really useful. Jesse's published this, and you can copy and paste this page into any LLM that you're talking to give it some context about Liquid. I personally use the Liquid tester all the time, which you can find by just doing the Command K global search thing and type Liquid tester. You can see it here. What I like about it is that number one, it gives you this little place where you can type some Liquid and see how it outputs for a specific subscriber. So this default one that's here, the visitor greeting is a default Bento field, but if we did like first name, this user doesn't have a first name, so we'll say nothing. And then this one here, the first name is in there as Z. So if we do this, it'll say, hi, Z. And the reason this page is so useful is that throughout the page itself, it gives you a bunch of kind of go-to snippets that people need to use. And if you scroll further down, I feel like somewhere in here, yeah, it shows you all the custom fields you have and how to easily paste them in Liquid. So if you have plan type, you could just click copy and then paste it up here, render Liquid, and now you see they're on the professional plan. So this page is so nifty because it's almost like this little scratch pad where I'll test some stuff I'm playing with, and then once it looks good here, then I'll move it into my actual flow or email or whatever. And then a couple of other ways to write it in the first place or learn it. Tanuki can help with basic stuff, first off, so use Tanuki within Bento when you can because it's simple. If you are a ChatGPT user, I made this Liquid Assistant GPT for my own software tool, not Bento. So ignore the column context thing. My software tool is like almost like a lead spreadsheet manager kind of thing. So if you're using it for Bento, I always just go in here and click the small Liquid questions one, and I can just have it write different expressions for me. So I'm like, I'm trying to do blah, blah, blah. Can you help me write it? And it'll write nicely commented out code for you to understand. And when I say commented out, that's a coder lingo where basically you can write what's called a comment, which will not actually be processed as code. It's just there's like an internal note to self. And so when I say comment, here's an example. So this is the Liquid syntax for comment. They actually have a couple ways to write comments. This is what's called a multi-line comment. So anything after this, so squiggle percent comment, squiggle percent, and then before the end comment, all of this is not going to actually be run. So this right here is a very complicated one. We'll get to that in a minute. But in any case, if you go in here, I was just having it produce a little example for you. This one doesn't have comments, this one does. So if you were to copy and paste this into the Liquid tester and then render it, you see that it's using, hey, visitor first name, thanks for joining us. And if we were to grab this second one, it should render exactly the same, although it might have some like empty spaces. Yeah, so you can see it's still rendered all of the times that you hit enter between the comments. So like if we do this, it's going to remove like 4 spaces. See? And that'll come into play in a moment when I talk to you about minifying. But again, I don't want to get super advanced if you don't want to get super advanced. So the main thing, if you're just doing basic stuff like if they have a first name, do this. If not, do this. If they're in the pro plan, do this. Otherwise, do this. For that kind of stuff, you don't really need to go much further in this video than this moment. Just get some help from Tanuki, get some help from ChatGPT, whatever, and leverage the liquid tester to make sure your stuff will work. My rule of thumb is that if I'm using liquid for like an if else or for some kind of injection, I want to try to test all the different possible combinations that it could render in to make sure they all work correctly and look good. If you've done that, then you're good to go. If you just write the liquid without testing it first, that's how you end up with emails where there are just like empty spaces where clearly the person was trying to inject a variable and they didn't. And I think that's most of the liquid mistakes I see. It's just because people didn't actually test the liquid that they wrote. So here on this page you're on, I have a few of the like basic common examples of liquid that you will use quite often. So one of these is like the concept of a default. Whenever you see a pipe like this in liquid, this is a pipe character. It's basically used for separating built-in liquid functions, as it were. So this here, like the concept of default, is a liquid function. So what this function does is if this is blank, it's going to output whatever you put as the default. But there are a bunch of other liquid functions. Like there's one for lowercasing it. There's one for doing a find and replace. There's one for like adding a currency conversion or something like that. I've done some interesting stuff with currency before. Here are some other ones. So like capitalize, adding one, truncating something to the first 100 characters. All of these are examples of what I just called functions, but maybe they're actually called filters. My bad. And then I have a couple of examples of conditionals. You can also in liquid do else ifs. So in this case, you have if, else, and if, but I'm pretty dang sure you can do an else if. Let me just double check real quick. Yeah, you can. So this would be the syntax for it. So it doesn't have the E after else, but otherwise this is how it flows. So that's useful. And you've already played with this direct injection a bit. One other nifty thing about Bento that I really, really, really love is the ability to set environment variables. So for anything that you want to just kind of globally use for all your emails, or for not necessarily all your emails, but a lot of your emails, but that is perhaps subject to change. And when you do change it, you'd want to change it across the board. An environment variable is so, so, so useful. So within your Bento dashboard, if you go to the settings and then you click environment, you can create a new variable that's like, so let's just say we call this Zach test. Hey, bruh. So let's say that's our new environment variable, which by the way, environment variables can hold HTML, they can hold text. I think they can hold maybe even other environment variables. I've not tried that, but you can do liquid within them. So I like to do it for like footer address, promo unsubscribe. I've done it before when I have a limited number of seats available for like a promo that I'm running, where I'll go in and like manually update the count so people can see the seats getting smaller without me having to remember to change that number in a million different emails. So now if we were to go to the liquid tester, I'll probably have to refresh it. If I just paste this environment variable, render liquid, look at that. And then if we wanted to, we could even do the old first name thing just so you can see. So instead of bruh, what if bruh is just the fallback? So it would say, hey, bruh, if they didn't have a first name set. But if they did, it would show their first name. So once again, I'm going to just copy it from here, paste it. So for this person, oh, interesting. So this might be one limitation of the liquid tester, because I can tell you for sure that in a proper email, this would work. Let me just double check though. Yeah. So in a proper email, it does work. So this one shows, hey, bruh, but if we were to preview it as this guy with the Z, you can see that it does indeed say hazy. So that's just one note for the liquid tester itself, but within an actual email, it works fine. So before we get into the advanced stuff, which you can leave for if you just want the simple stuff, final thing I wanted to talk about is magic splits. So I mentioned before that I really like magic splits over the normal splits because they evaluate much more quickly. So if you do a normal split, it takes about often like 5 minutes in order for it to get processed. So for something like a welcome email or a thanks for purchasing email or whatever, you don't want somebody to have to wait 5 minutes. And so if you just made a normal split, this would make them wait 5 minutes, and you don't want that. So what you can do is do a magic split. And what a magic split does is it evaluates a liquid expression to choose its path. So I found that you don't actually have to output false if you don't want to. False is just a fallback, and it says that up here. The main thing that's important is that you have some liquid that evaluates to true. So in the liquid assistant thingy, I had it make this little example output for us. So what I wanted is something where if the target date is in the future, it'll output true. Otherwise, it'll output false. In a moment, I'll talk about the minification. I'm not sure how this will work in the liquid tester here with all these spaces, but we'll see. So right now, there's a lot of code here, but I tried to make it set up in a friendly way. So right now, it's outputting false because July 22nd, today is July 22nd. So it's not in the future. But if I change this to 23rd, it should output true. And it did. Amazing. And so this is a great example of how a pretty complex liquid expression could be used in a magic split. And so this would essentially be like, if we are still in pre-launch, like let's say that your product launches on August 1st. And if we're still in pre-launch, you would want to go down this true path where you send all these hyped up emails, like, yeah, it's coming soon. And then if we're not still in pre-launch, we wouldn't send those. So we'd send something else. That's what this magic split would do. So you can do all sorts of things, like anything you could ever think about that can render in liquid, you can do here. And there are some really, really, really amazing possibilities as a result of this. So from here, I want you to lean on the text on the page. I'm just going to kind of skim over to let you know what's here and paint the shape. So a few advanced things that I regularly like to do. One of them is I like to log stuff to comma-separated custom fields sometimes. So in the example section of this course, you'll see me show how my evergreen newsletter / shadow newsletter works. Basically, I have every newsletter I create, I make like a little slug for it, like a friendly name with lowercase, no spaces, that kind of stuff. And whenever someone receives one, what I do is I append it to a field that's just this like gigantic field of all the newsletters they've gotten. But the problem is you can't just always add a comma before something, and you can't always add a comma after, because it will, if you always add a comma before, the first one looks bad because there's this leading comma. And if you always add a comma after, the last one looks bad because there's a trailing comma. So I use this little liquid expression when setting the field. So I'm pretty dang sure, yeah, this is in a set field. So what you could do if you were doing this, let me find it. So you can go attributes, update field, and then newsletters received, and then paste this big ass expression. But for doing something like this, this is where it kind of becomes important to think about minifying, as it's called, your code. Because in this case, notice all these spaces that the line breaks are transformed into. What this will do is it'll literally be setting the field to have these spaces in the field value, which is bad. You don't want that. So if we were to skip forward to this part, I coded up this little tiny minifier thing, which if you're a non-developer, this I'm sure will be a little bit overwhelming, but if you give this page context to AI, it can help you with it. But basically, I made a little minifier that takes long form liquid and compresses it. Let me show you an example. All right, so here's one. This project's a little bit unorganized, but basically within my code tool, I have a runner that runs my minification scripts on anything I paste into this file, and it just renders it out here. So here's the original stuff pasted in here. Notice all these like line breaks and extra spaces and stuff like that. This is the unminified version. It outputs to this. So very minimal spaces, like between tags, no spaces, stuff like that. So it creates something that's very safe to just copy and paste into something like one of these set field ones without worrying about the spaces getting set. So that's an important thing if you're going to mess with crazy stuff like this, where you're setting a custom field to a very complex liquid expression. Where the spaces don't seem to matter is with like the magic split that we looked at a minute ago. The spaces were just fine there. Another one I wanted to show you that is so nifty that I'm using in one of my welcome sequences right now that I super love is this one. This is like a real world example of where complicated liquid is really useful for doing something that would be hard to do otherwise. I have this function that essentially waits until the next business day. And so at the top of this function, you can configure it. So in this case, we're saying Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are the sendable days of week. And we want to send it at 2 p.m. UTC, which is, I think, 10 a.m. Eastern. And then we can set the minimum days to wait. So basically, in practice, whenever I am adding a delay within the newsletter, the welcome sequence flow where I'm using this, I am just changing this one value. And what this does is it is essentially just outputting a timestamp of when it should wait until. So you can essentially just plop this into a delay node. So if we go in here and we add a delay, by default, it's going to wait a certain amount of minutes, but you can change it so that it's liquid. And so see how this placeholder says visitor.webinar at. So this is showing an example of like outputting an actual timestamp here. And so if we wanted to, no, not that. Where did I put it? Here. We could take that minified one, since it's quite a complex situation, and do this. And what this will do is delay them until the next business day that is a minimum of X days apart. As always, it's smart to test this. So this is a really good example before when I said that I like to test things for users before deploying them. This is one that required a lot of testing first. So like, let's say test the date delay. Let me save this and show you a test real quick. So let's say I do this. Let's set it to 3 days to wait because today is a Wednesday. So 3 business days, we're expecting 1 for Thursday, 2 for Friday, and then Monday. So we're expecting that Monday is when it's next eligible. For these kinds of things, will usually make sure I have some kind of node after the delay because I feel like, and I could be wrong, but I feel like I had an experience once where if there's a delay without anything after it, Bento doesn't even bother to run it because it can tell there's like nothing to do after it anyway, but I could be wrong about that. But anyway, I'm paranoid, so I just typically in real life, you wouldn't have a delay with nothing after it anyway, so I always just add something after it, but I could be totally wrong. So I've pulled up a subscriber who I want to test this on. So I'm just going to create an event for that trigger event. And once the flow processes, what we should see is that they will be in here waiting until that date. And it already processed it. Amazing. So July 27th. So today is the 22nd. Let's find out what Monday is. So 23rd, Thursday, 24th, Friday, 25th, Saturday, 26th, Sunday, 27th, Monday. Oh my God, it worked. So that's an example of a really nifty and complex piece of liquid doing stuff that would be impossible to do without it. Like I can't think of any native way with drag and drop Bento nodes to do this. Maybe you can, but this is what to me felt the easiest way to do it. So I think that's the overview. Nice thing for Liquid is that because it's used in Shopify, it was made by Shopify, there's a lot of information about Liquid online. So I don't always use the LLM like that ChatGPT assistant or Tanuki or whatever. I often just go to Google and I'm like, Liquid code language, lowercase. And often the Liquid documentation will show you the little filter to do that. And that's quite simple too. So good luck, enjoy, and I'm excited to see, well, I probably won't see, but I'm excited to know that you will probably hopefully build some cool stuff.